Hi, everyone, and welcome. So, today I am going to discuss the first book in the First Law series, or the first standalone in the First Law series, which is titled Best Served Cold. And I am joined today by Steve over at Steve Talks Books and Jose from Amazing World. And I have linked both of their channels in the description box down below if you're interested. So, I guess that most people, if you watch my channel, you know these two guys. So, there is no need for introduction. But it seems like we have a little bit mixed feelings about this book, so I think that it will be an interesting discussion. We are going to talk about spoilers, but for these first couple of minutes, we're going to keep it spoiler free. Maybe just say your general appreciation of the book and the differences that you felt compared to the original trilogy. So, Jose, let's start with you.
I really enjoyed the book. I literally had laugh out loud moments. Um, it's also what you should come to expect from Joe Abercrombie if you've read the first Law trilogy. He hints at places where he's going to take you, creates these expectations, and then crushes them mercilessly later. So he hints at certain relationships between characters that may happen, and I guess it's the whole green dark thing, isn't it? To sort of do like a bit of a bait and switch, misguide you into where the story is going to go. But if you're okay with that, if you understand where you're getting yourself into, then it shouldn't come as a surprise, and it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I read the First Law trilogy with Yulene. Was it last year? Yeah, I think it was last year.
Last year, yeah.
About this time, I think. And so I was excited to, by the end of this trilogy, I was ready to move on. I enjoyed it, but it was kind of, so I was excited to get into the standalones. And Abercrombie is really good with characters, but sometimes he leans too heavily on them. I think that he kind of uses it a little too much, but it was fine. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it, but it was somewhere in the middle for me for this book. But I'm hopeful for the rest of the standalones. I've heard some are hit and miss, so kind of expected one to be kind of lukewarm on. But I do see why people enjoy this, but it wasn't a huge hit for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I might be a little bit in between you two. For me, it wasn't as good as I was expecting, but to be honest, I had quite high expectations, and I don't think that was really honest towards the standalone, because I really liked the original trilogy, but I wasn't head over heels with it as some people. Some people really say like Joe Abercrombie, best writer ever. That trilogy can't be topped by anything. And I was like, it's fine. But towards the third book, I had enough of the humor sometimes, the repetition that often came. So I wanted to have something different. So I shouldn't have gone into Best Served Cold thinking this might be a 5-star read. I think in the end, it was fine, but it had some pacing issues for me. I also liked the characters in the original trilogy a little bit more. I think that the main character here was really strong, but the interaction that she had with the other characters, I thought that was more fun in the original trilogy. But in the end, I still really enjoyed it. I also listened to the audiobook. I don't know how you two read it, but I think that the narrator of the audiobook also increased my experience and just made me enjoy it more. And I don't know how I would have liked it if I read it physically. But I don't know, did you listen to it or read it?
I read all the way.
Yeah, I read it. I don't do audiobooks at all. It's I don't know. I think I've got nothing against it, but I like the physicality of a book and holding it, and as I said, I liked it. I even liked the edition of the book. I like the texture of the cover. I like the font, the setting, yeah, everything. It was great.
Yeah, I can't do audio either.
Okay, so both of you read it physically. Well, I go back and forth, and maybe for the next one, I just want to read it to see how much of my enjoyment is the narrator. So I might just pick up the physical copy because I do have them here, so I don't have an excuse to not do it. But Jose, you absolutely loved the first trilogy. You just wanted more of it.
No, I didn't love the first trilogy. I think it was a solid, okay read for me. I think I did a ranking of the fantasy books series I've read in the past, and I think I gave it a 7/10 or something like that. I think the issue that I had with the first law, and particularly this standalone, is that it isn't really a fantasy book. Particularly in Best Served Cold, there is zero fantasy to
Mhm.
it. It could have been a historical fiction set in, Renaissance Europe, or something like that. The world building is kept to a minimum. It could easily have been some northern Italian republic and that sort of thing. So um, if you go in expecting like the world building and all those classic fantasy elements, they are not there at all. But like you mentioned before, I think Abercrombie's character work is really, really good,
Mhm.
and I think good characters can carry a weaker plot, but not the other way around. So
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I actually do really agree with that. I'm just going to say it for the people who are watching now. It might be best if we go into spoiler territory now, just so we don't have to be scared that we make any mistakes. So now, if you haven't read the book, please step out, go and read it, and then come back. And I do really agree that this one had zero magic almost. In the first trilogy, you have the mage Bias. You have, especially towards the end, you have more magic. You have Logan Nine Fingers, which I thought was a pretty strong character with the multiple personas almost, where you ask yourself with the ghosts, is this magic or is this just him having multiple personas? So there was a little bit more magic in that one, I think, than in this one. You have eaters, I think, in this one, but just as very small side characters. Most of it could have, like Jose said, be set in the Renaissance, somewhere in Italy, and you wouldn't have noticed the difference really. But maybe it ties into the bigger story.
I mean, I don't know. I'm almost done with The Heroes, which is the
Ooh.
next book.
Oh wow.
And yeah, all I'm going to say is that there's the same lack of magic. It's almost totally absent, and that's what I'm going to say about that one. So I think it is his take on fantasy, very, very light fantasy, I should say. Apologies, they're coming from me.
No, wait. Okay, yeah, but that's interesting. I also think, but this is maybe just a small issue that I had, or something that my preference lies somewhere else. In the original trilogy, you had the city settings, but you also had more being in the nature towards the north. While here you had a lot of cities, but they felt a little bit similar to me. I know that some people say that Joe Abercrombie has amazing world building, and maybe that's something that you see if you really look at the series as a whole. But in this one, I couldn't really say, oh, this city is very different from this one. They all felt quite similar to me.
Yeah, something that stood out to me right away starting this Best of Cold is the environments and how good he is at describing environments, and it gives you a clear picture in your mind of where they are in nature, But yeah, I agree. The cities seemed pretty. I don't know. I'm gonna try not be a Debbie Downer, but I agree with you too about the pacing. I think it could have been a few hundred pages shorter and still told the same story.
Mhm.
But I think Abercrombie reminded me of Stephen King because Stephen King likes to go off on these tangents and kind of take you on this other side quest that has nothing to do with the main plot. And he likes to kind of show off, like he's so good at writing that he could just, kind of take you out of the plot for a minute. I think Abercrombie he likes to show off a little bit, and with the battles and the character quirks, and Yolene, you mentioned the character quirks getting the sort of Best of Cold. They were fun, but at the end, it's kind of okay. That's enough.
Mhm.
So I kind of got the same vibe here. As the humor was okay, but it just said the same things over and over again. But the characters are. I did like the main character. I wish we had more of some of my favorite parts were hearing about her history and her growing up with her brother, and that was the funnest part. I wish we had a little bit more of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, to very quickly go back to the whole world building thing, for me, it was very easy to imagine because, like I said, it's all very
Mm.
Central European based. And there's one of the cities they go to, which he describes where the royal or the aristocratic families there have got houses with tall towers where they're trying to outdo each other to build the tallest tower. That's this town of Bologna in Italy where I've been to. So, like, for me already, it's like, I know this place. It's very easy to imagine the world that he's created because he really hasn't. Um,
Mhm.
And in terms of the characters and those character quirks, that's a very easy, quick way to build character, to get you familiar with a particular character. But as the series goes on, as you read more of his books in this first law world, they all seem a bit samey. Like the Northmen are all a bit samey. I think the dialogue felt very manufactured, but because it was so sharp and it was so cutting, and it was quite fun. But it reminded me of the maybe early Hollywood movies where the dialogue is so well constructed line by line that it sort of flows, and the characters are having digs at each other very quickly, and everyone is sharp-witted and quick-witted and has got a comeback ready. That it's not really how things work, but he does that a lot as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I do agree. But I actually really liked the dialogues. But like you said, it felt like they always knew exactly what to say. And if you think too much about it, that's not the way it really goes. I also really liked Manza's character. I wish that we have seen more, or we had seen more of Benna, because he was dead from the first couple of chapters. But in the end, I liked how you could see how he actually changed a lot, and you think that he's the good one, because Manza sees Benna as her little brother almost, who she needs to protect. But then throughout the story, you notice that he's really a sociopath, and a lot of the things that happen to Manza is because Benna is just doing whatever he wants. And I like that twist on the revenge story, maybe, where in the beginning you feel like Manza has been wronged, but then towards the end you realize what the Duke did was actually justified, because Benna was going to betray him. And I like that difference, but I wish that Benna was either alive for longer of the series, or maybe that we had seen that story in a different book other than a flashback. But those flashbacks were my favorite part, and how that changed your perspective on the book and on the different characters.
And am I the only one who felt like at the beginning they were a couple, and that was kind of weird?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's all hinted at, isn't it? That sort of throughout the book, this whole incestuous relationship is even commented upon by some of the characters, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think it's in keeping with this whole grim, dark world where you may sympathize with Monza. Maybe I didn't. To me, she was one of the less interesting characters. But no matter who you support or root for in his books, nobody is perfect. They're all flawed. They all have a mean streak. They all have skeletons in the closet. And it's hard to pick sides with any character because they're all fairly disgusting to a degree, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are.
My favorite being the Master Poisoner.
Yeah, I actually really liked him. And there you also have that he was actually not going to betray Manza. Manza told Day, I think, like, watch out for him because he's going to betray you, while he really liked his apprentice. And because Manza said that, that whole betrayal thing happened. So I liked how Joe Abercrombie really showed different sides of betrayal in this book. That's something that I quite enjoyed. But the Master Poisoner, he was funny at moments. I think that he was also the type of character that we hadn't seen in the original trilogy. Like Shivers, Logan Ninefingers are a little bit similar, but the Master Poisoner, he was something completely different. And I liked that.
Yeah, he was fun. That was a good character.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, and the shanked character that comes up at the end, because I could see that coming from the second that she gets healed from the murder attempt. I knew that this healer guy was going to come back at the end in some way, shape, or form. Were you all expecting that as well?
Yeah.
I was expecting him to come back, but I had no idea that he was shanked. So when that was revealed, I didn't expect that. I expect him to be a completely different character.
Something with this one that stood out to me too is Abercrombie likes to subvert expectations, and he does have those moments that surprise you or catch you off guard. But the rest of it is all very by the numbers. Everything is very, they walk into the bar and the guy has the coin on his hands and he's flipping the coin on his fingers, and it's all very You know, but he does but he does flip it on its head once in a while. But I would prefer a little bit more of a balance there. But
Hmm.
I think is you've come to expect him to shatter your expectations, because the potential romantic relationship between Monza and Carl Shivers, it's all there. It's bound to happen, and then he takes it away at the end. And I think maybe if First Law is the first kind of this sort of darker fantasy you've read, may come as a surprise. But now, whenever I pick an Abercrombie book, like I know that whatever he's hinting at is not going to happen.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that he uses somewhat the same formula, like you said, in each of the books, like the awkward sex scene between these two people. You know that it's going to happen. And in the first trilogy, it was the same with Logan Ninefingers, and I forgot her name, but yeah. So you see the similar type of things to add humor to the story. And I do think, like you said, Jose, if you haven't read a lot of Grimdark, you're going to be blown away by this because you're expecting something. This is fantasy. You know how fantasy is going to go, and then he subverts expectations. When you read more of his work, but also of other people's, you come to expect certain things, and that takes away some of the shine. But on the other hand, it's not really the fault of the author. It's just, if you've read a lot of this, in the end, you can't continue to be original about everything. And I do think that his characters then make up for a lot of those minor faults. But I am quite curious to see if he can really make, because this world is 9 books, 10 books, if you count the Sharp Ends short stories. I want to see if he does something new, because 10 books of the same formula, in around halfway, I will get bored by it, I think. But maybe the heroes is completely different.
But I think the nice thing about it is that you don't have to read them all in order. There may be some overarching story connecting everything together, but it's not necessary to read them all. You can read the first trilogy, you can read the standalones. It's not like, I don't know, maybe I don't know Malasan, I haven't read it, but it's not a Game of Thrones. It's not the Wheel of Time where you need this massive investment of time to come to grips with the characters and the world and the story. So I think that's nice in a way.
Yeah, I do think that that's a great point, because often long series, I need to be extremely invested, or think that it's going to be amazing. Otherwise, I don't know if I want to have that time investment. And that's why, for example, The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, it's 16 books, but it's divided into trilogies. So you can read one trilogy, just rest easy, read something else in between. And that Joe Abercrombie does the same here. I do appreciate that. And it's not often that you have a series, even if it's divided into smaller parts, that you then also have standalones. So I do like that. And I think that that's also maybe why this book, it's the first standalone that I've read by him, is a lot more plot driven. You do have a more clearer plot. With the original trilogy, the first 2 books, I did not know what was going to happen. And then the third one tied it nicely together. But I think if you're not a very character-driven reader, that first trilogy might be difficult to get through. While here you do see clear, this is going to be a revenge plot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What did you both feel? How did you both feel about including so many characters from the first trilogy?
Julian?
I actually really like that. I know that it can get maybe a little bit cheesy, or it can make the world feel smaller sometimes if you have different stories and you have the same characters coming again and again. But then on the other hand, I really liked it because I liked those original characters. And especially the one with the green eye and the blue eye that you see sometimes. I think he's connected to Bias in a way. I like that we saw him sometimes throughout this book, because okay, there are bigger things at stake here. There are wheels turning that we don't know about, people who want this story to go in a certain way. So I actually enjoyed that. And I like that Shivers was here as well, even though he's not my favorite Northman. So I was comparing him the entire time to Logan Ninefingers, and okay, he's not that interesting. But it's still nice to have somebody with a completely different worldview and background to be in this small party. I do think that added something. Vitari being there as well, I think that made the world too small for my liking. Like, what are the chances that you're going to have multiple people who were in the first book again in the same band of people for a quest? But while reading it, it's not that I had an issue with it. It's just if I think about it afterwards, like, okay, yeah, that's a coincidence.
For me, it wasn't an issue at all. And I think if you were to pick up Best Served Cold as your first entry point into the first law world, it's all right. It's you're not missing anything out. And when you go, you can make that connection later when you go to the first law trilogy, or you read first law trilogy and then come to this, and you make the same connections, and it works. And maybe because I'm already into the heroes, I think over the whole books, maybe he's giving you different stories from different perspectives of the same group of characters. So I would love to see more of what's his face, the head of the mercenaries, Nikomo Koska.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, I really like it.
he was brilliant. To me, he's such almost Discworld Terry Pratchett style character, sort of the cowardly mercenary. He's a very anti-archetype character, and yet he's successful and really good at what he does. So I think some of these characters I really want to see more of.
Yeah. How did you like it, Steve, to have those characters come back?
I thought there were a little bit too many of them. I would have been fine with a couple, but I thought it was a little too many. Like you said, Yelena, kind of too many coincidences. I do get why they're connecting everything together, but a few too many. But it didn't bother me too much.
Yeah. Well, I must say that Casca is one of those characters that I almost forgot about, but yes, he was in the original one, and we have him here again. And I do like his humor is something that I still find very funny. And how he goes around with his mercenary army, and they try to do as little as possible to get as much money as possible. And that whole scheme of we fight on opposite sides, we both get money, but we will never really fight. I really like that. But then, like I said, like Vitari is a character that I didn't really need, maybe because she had a very small role in the original trilogy. And then having her be married or at least have a relationship with Chengt, that all felt very tight-knitted. But Casca, yes, I want to see more of him.
I suppose if you like the characters, it's not going to bother you that you get to see more of them, isn't it? So that's down to taste. But yeah, I made a point of it, but does it bother you to go into I don't know if it's like a pretense fantasy series when in fact it is not?
I don't mind as long as I know beforehand. And I think that maybe it threw me off a little bit that it was so minimal in everything that you have here.
Like I would recommend, I would say to people, this is a really good book, go and, give it a try. But like over Christmas, I met with a friend and he was asking me for fantasy book recommendations. And if you want fantasy, this is not going to give you the flavor for it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you need to tell that to people who go in. And I think that maybe that's also my expectation. In the first trilogy, you had those eaters. And that was one of my favorite things about that trilogy because it was so dark and I wanted to know more. And I think that maybe I was expecting that in this one because every time one of the eaters was mentioned, I thought, okay, now we're going to get more of that. And if you know that, and if you tell people going in, okay, this is a fantasy story because it's set in a secondary world, you have some minor influences, but in its core, fantasy is not important. The magic is not important. If you know that while going in, I think that it's fine because the characters are so good. And because the plot, at times, even though people say that in the original trilogy there's not that much plot, the third one ties it up pretty nicely. So that's strong enough that you don't need the magic. But as a fantasy fan, I am a little bit disappointed that there's not that much of it.
I think it almost works in its favor for people that want to get into fantasy but don't have a lot of experience reading fantasy. I think this is a good gateway drug for people who I want to get into it, but I'll get confused with there's too many magic systems and these huge worlds. I think like the Blade itself is a good place to start with people who want to dip their toes in because there's humor, there's good characters, it's almost like Quentin Tarantino wrote a fantasy book. is the way I
That's
kind
a
of.
good
I like that. I like
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
So I feel
Now,
like for me, it was one of the first fantasy books that we really got into. So I
Mhm.
think it helped me kind of get used to the genre.
yeah, I think that that's a good point, especially because the world can be difficult to get into. In the first one, you do have quite a bit of characters that you need to remember. I also think that if you don't know anything about fantasy, maybe some of the tropes that are being flipped on their head, you might not appreciate as much because you don't know how often these tropes are used. So it's a good gateway, but on the other hand, I think if you read a lot of fantasy and then everything gets flipped, you're also going to be surprised, at least the first couple of books.
That's a good point.
So just I'm just gonna go on a completely different point here, if you don't mind. Did anyone have any issues with with the torture and the sex? Because if anyone is squeamish about these things, they need to be warned as well that you have fairly graphic torture scenes in the book, and and sex scenes as well, where there's nothing erotic about it. It's actually quite a dirty way in which is it's a sex is disgusting and the torture is fairly graphic there. Uh, so I don't know. I was a bit squirmish at certain points with the torture. It's like, oh mate, that's one sentence too many there. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
What do you think,
Um,
Julie?
um, well, I think that it's definitely important to say that this is grimdark. It's not your typical fantasy, so there are going to be some scenes that are quite explicit. On the other hand, it's difficult for me to put it on a scale because I do read more grimmer books and grimdark plus at times, you could say. So for me, because most of the characters are still enjoyable and you can still understand what they're doing, even though you don't agree with them, you can understand them and you can follow them. That there are some graphic scenes, okay, but the world doesn't feel as bleak as some other books. So be aware, yes, there are graphic scenes. I don't mind them. But if you're completely new to fantasy or you're completely new to darker sides, you have never read horror, for example, then yes, you should know. And if you don't want explicit sex scenes, but to be honest, those scenes are so funny. That's not a sex scene. That's just an ugly mess of, yeah. Especially if you listen to the audiobook, you don't want to know. It's just
Okay.
funny.
So yeah, I think as far as the sex scenes, I think it was supposed to be awkward and weird, because the characters didn't. It wasn't really enjoyable, or it was, it was that weird thing. So I don't think it was too graphic, but I think and like Yelene said, I think we read a lot of darker books, and I read a lot of horror, so the torture scenes didn't phase me compared to what I have been reading. So it was pretty much. I think this is more on the lighter side of grimdark. If you talk about the darkness factor, I think it's it's still dark, but it's not. There's some really the grimdark plus, as Julian said. So I think if it's someone that's getting into fantasy that just reads traditional or epic fantasy where everything's really, it doesn't get too violent or too bloody, then I want to give people a heads up, like, hey, just to let you know, this is a little darker than what you're used to. So just kind of let them not too
Yeah, I
far.
agree. But I also think that it's a good one if you know that it has its grimmer moments. Try this one, and if you think that this one goes too far, don't read other grimdark books. And if you like this one, maybe go a little bit deeper into the pool and see how far you can get. So I think that this is a nice introduction to grimdark because yes, you have those graphic scenes, but like I said, the world in itself and the characters and especially the humor, they elevate a lot. And they can make you forget you have that dark scene. Okay, maybe difficult to get through for some people, but afterwards you have a joke and it turns funny again. And that's especially the torture scenes with Glocta in the first trilogy. I had to laugh sometimes, and I thought, is there something wrong with me? But it's just how he writes them. And the sex scenes the same. I have heard some people say, like Joe Abercrombie can't write sex scenes. He means them to be like a little bit awkward, I think. I don't think that he tries to have a sensual sex scene.
No, I don't think he's trying at all to write an erotic sex scene. That's I think that's far from his intention, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe he
Now,
writes novels under a different pen name.
yeah, who knows? I actually don't know, but is the entire First Law series finished? Because we now have the completion of the last trilogy. Is he going to write more?
I think from what I read somewhere, he signed a fairly long book deal. Like his contract was for like, well, I suppose he's already written them, isn't it? But I think it was for like 9 or 10 books. So maybe with the completion of this second trilogy, he's fulfilled that initial contract he signed after the Blade itself, and maybe, from what my impression is that he's done with it. But I could be very wrong.
Yeah, you never know, of course, because I know that the world and the technology evolves. So that's why I really want to get to that Age of Madness trilogy. Because I like that idea. In a lot of fantasy, the world remains the same, and you have that medieval feeling throughout, a fantasy series that lasts 15 books, and you start thinking this is not natural. And that's something that I do think Joe Abercrombie does quite well. You do have new inventions. You do have a world that isn't stagnant. So I want to see maybe if we have more of that in the heroes, possibly, what is it, Red Country? But I've heard most of it with Age of Madness.
I'm waiting for this to get adapted into a live like a TV series or something. This would be perfect for it. This First Law universe.
Yeah. I think because the dialogue is almost all written, isn't it? You wouldn't touch any dialogue scene to do a TV show adaptation. A bit like what's his face? Lies of Locke Lamora. Scott Lynch, Gentleman Bastards, isn't it? It's another one that would be easily translated into TV because there's little fantasy. So I suppose the special effects budget would be quite low there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I see so many people asking for a Mistborn adaptation, and I think that that's almost impossible. Unless you have a very big budget, there's so much magic there that you're going to have to need to have a lot of money. While here, the magic is so low, and most of it, especially the standalones, are in a city that's quite close to our own world. I think that you could do it. And because most of it is the characters and a plot that is not really magical, it could be pulled off with a minor budget.
Well, it would be like Game of Thrones, isn't it? Just film a location across Europe and you're done. The sets are done for you. So.
Yeah, I agree. Now, we've talked a lot about the characters, but I was wondering how you liked the ending with Manza being, I don't know if she now is the Duke, or at least she's the leader of this country. How did you like that? Do you think that it fit, or that it was a little bit strange?
Steve?
I kind of thought it fit. I thought it was kind of what I was expecting. I thought she'd either walk away or she would end up the new Duke or whatever the role is. But yeah, I kind of figured that would be the end. If something really crazy didn't happen, I thought that's probably what would be the ending.
I didn't care because I think whether she walked away or she became the Duchess or whatever, it was irrelevant. The story was not about that. It's a revenge tale, and once that revenge is fulfilled in whichever way it is, whatever happens after is irrelevant. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, he could have done whatever he wanted, and it would have been pretty much okay.
Yeah, for me, I saw a lot of similarities with Gisele's storyline, where you have somebody who has no intention of being on the throne, or at least he never thinks that he's going to be, and then in the end, he's the one on the throne. And then I wasn't expecting it. With this one, I was expecting Manza to end up the way that she does. But on the other hand, I felt that the ending dragged too much. And maybe that is because, Jose, like you said, it is a revenge story in itself. But that ending lasted a lot. It was a lot of pages, a lot of chapters that, for me personally, shouldn't have been there. I really liked the beginning. Then the middle, I start thinking, okay, we have another battle, and it keeps coming. So I would have liked it to be a little bit shorter, maybe. And then that ending where she ends up on, it's not a throne, but she's a duke or whatever, that could have been shorter as well. Just this is how she ends up. Although her being pregnant, I do want to see the repercussions of that, because I think that that's not the last we're going to hear about it.
Yeah. I didn't mind. I thought the ending was fine. He took a lot longer to wrap up the first trilogy than he did to wrap up this book. The only thing I found, because you just mentioned about what a different potential ending could have been, is that throughout the book, both Mons and Cowell, they both realize the pointlessness of the road they're on, but they're just compelled to finish it, to see it to the end, even though they've realized that actually the revenge is pointless. It's not going to bring her the closure that she needs, or the relief that she needs, but it's almost like, we're just going to push on. And I think that takes a little bit of agency out of the characters. I think it would have been interesting for him to explore that more from the characters that he's created, rather than I'm going to take him from A to B, and kind of 3/4 of the way, the journey becomes a bit forced upon them. I don't know if you felt the same.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do think that that's a good point, because, like you said, they do realize that this revenge is not what they want in the end, especially Mansa, because she starts realizing that the people that she's killing because they have betrayed her are actually not bad people. She does it with, who is it? Her second in command. And then he starts telling her what she did. And she actually betrayed Casca. So she's not better than the ones that she's trying to punish. But she still keeps doing it. And I think that maybe towards the end, she had a moment that she wanted to, the son of the Duke, he actually wasn't part of the betrayal party. He happened to be there, but he walked out. And she started to feel pity for him. And I think that maybe she would have wanted him to live. But then Shivers steps in. And he stabs him to death. And I actually liked Shivers' storyline quite a bit, even though he's not my favorite character. In the beginning, he wants to be better. And that's why he leaves the North, he goes there, he's going to be a better man. And he gets swept along the journey with Mansa. And while Mansa I think she goes from somebody who just wants revenge to somebody who starts seeing the bigger picture. Shivers is the complete opposite. He wants to be a better man, and then halfway through he says, well, this world is just gone to shit, so I don't need to try even. And he turns very dark very quickly. And I like to see that. Also how I think the midway point, they start feeling some attraction towards one another, but then they drift again towards completely opposite directions. Where Mansa often says to herself, I liked him because he was the only one who had hope for this world. But now he's so dark that I can't even stand being around him. So I liked it, but on the other hand, yes, maybe Mansa should have been stronger in those feelings of revenge is not going to be the answer here.
Yeah, as far as the end goes, I did wonder. I think the story kind of wrapped up, and there was still like 50 or 60 pages left. And it's like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But he had a similar issue with the first trilogy, isn't it? Where we finish, and then he has to give every single character a bit of a wrap up. Maybe it's a thing with him. Maybe he doesn't like to leave things hanging there.
Yeah, he needs to tie everything up. That is, well, I was actually expecting to see something about Logan Ninefingers, because at the end of the first trilogy, at least I don't know if he's still alive or not. I think he's still alive, but we're basically left hanging there. And I thought that maybe we were going to hear something about him or just know what happened there. So sometimes he can definitely end on a cliffhanger. And that was something that I didn't like. So I'm now still waiting to see Logan Ninefingers again. But he was one of my favorite characters of the original trilogy. So maybe that's why.
Do you want a spoiler?
No.
All right, then.
But I have a feeling that we're going to hear something at the very least. He's his best character. He's not going to kill him off.
During that dream sequence, I thought I had to pause and because I must have missed where, I didn't catch on that it was a dream sequence. I thought he was actually there, so I had to go back and reread because I thought he was there talking to him. So that kind of
yeah.
I got it there for me.
But I do find it quite funny that we have such in the end, we didn't really enjoy the story to the same degree, but I do think that we all had the same remarks or the same feelings. Like, okay, characters very strong, plot towards the end, he doesn't really know how he needs to tie everything up. Magic, almost nothing. But yeah, I don't know what to think of it. I also don't know if I'm very excited to get into the heroes. But I have heard from a lot of people that Best Served Cold is the weakest one. And then I have heard from a lot of people that they enjoy Best Served Cold most of all.
Yeah.
So I just hope that I'm in that first group and that Best Served Cold, it was a fine book, but I didn't think that it added anything more to the original trilogy. Like if you read the original trilogy, for me that was enough. It didn't really add anything extra. And I also don't know if you have some authors where you really say, okay, this author grew as a writer. I read this, I had some remarks. Now this new book, he really improved. I think that he stayed more or less the same. But his writing was already pretty good from the first one, of course.
Yeah.
I think it's just down to personal taste, isn't it? Because I think we all agree on the main points and the main takes. And it's just about whether you like it enough to continue. So for me, I think, yeah, I mean, no rush. So I'll pick up the next trilogy at some point. There are authors and worlds where I've got zero interest after the first trilogy. So for me, for instance, Brian McClellan with the Gunpowder Mage trilogy, there is another trilogy in the same world, and I've got zero interest in revisiting that. John Wynne, Faithful and the Fallen, I really enjoyed that 4-book series. Might at some point pick up the second trilogy, but again, not that interested, even though I really enjoyed that. Whereas here, it's like, yeah, I can continue traveling the first low world and see what happens there. Because I think the writing style, the character work, everything for me works, even though I am missing a bit more of the fantastical elements.
It's when you bring up Faithful and the Fallen, because I think John Gwynne, leans a lot. He's really good at writing battle scenes. John Gwynne is, but there's too many of them. And I think this book it reminded me of Faithful and the Fallen because the battle scenes are really cool. He's really great at it. But when they go on for pages, I find myself just kind of skimming through when it's just battle after battle after battle. But he's really great at it. So,
but which is kind of the opposite to Julian mentioned before, earlier, Robin Hobb, who will actually shy away from writing battles. They happen a lot off page. So I guess different authors have got different trends, and I like the fact that they seem to be aware, and therefore you never see Robin Hobb trying to describe a battle scene because maybe she's decided that either she's not interested or he's not good at it, so why even try? And that's fair enough by me. So
yeah, I think that's a good point, especially because and that's a me thing. I just don't really like a lot of battle scenes. If there is one, I like to be very close to the characters. I need to be afraid for the characters, and I didn't really feel afraid while reading this. And I think maybe that's because even though it's a well-crafted, character-driven story, I don't feel very connected to the characters. So Shivers could have died, and I wouldn't have cared. It would have been a good scene probably, but I wouldn't really be like crying my eyes out. There are certain books where if that happens, I'm crying. I need to put down the book. And that's something that I quite enjoy. I just really like the emotional connection to characters. And some might say that you can't have that with Grimdark, but I have it with Grimdark. I can have bad characters that I just don't want to die. And here, maybe it's just you're not as connected, you're not as close to the characters as I like to be. And then if you don't like battle scenes, that connection with the two, it's too much for me, especially like the second half of this book. The first half didn't really have that many battle scenes. The second half did. But it was very well written. So that's just a personal preference. And he knows that he can write it well. So why not include it in the book? A lot of people obviously really like it.
I think that's a good point, actually. Now that you mention it, and I think back on it, there is no single character in Best Served Cold that I would have cared if they died or not. But I don't mean that in a negative way. Like I liked, maybe Monsard to me was the least favorite. So I like the characters, but maybe it's coming to accept that in this world, death is a regular occurrence, and if they die, they die, and that's the name of the game. But either way, I wouldn't have cared who. I wasn't rooting for anyone in particular.
Yeah. And I think that that's just his type of writing style. It's not that it's a fault of the author. It's not that he tries to write it really close to the character and that you're emotionally invested. It's his writing style. And I think that the humor also adds to that, that you're reading it more as a lighter read, even though it's dark. So you stay a little bit at a distance. But that being said, I do think that his his battles are very well crafted. I sometimes read battle scenes and I think, what's going on here? I can't envision this. I don't really know what's happening. And here I could always envision what was happening. And I think that that's quite important. And that's something that John Gwynne, for example, also does. But I just couldn't get into his books because I don't like battle scenes.
Well, word of warning then, because the Heroes is 600 pages telling one single battle that takes place over 3 days. That's the plot. That's the plot in a nutshell.
I saw the back of the book and it said something like 2 people, 1 battle. And I knew this is probably not going to be my favorite one. But then I have heard that it's more about the characters than the battle. So I don't know. But I'm going to go in with just lower expectations and then I might be surprised.
I think that's a clever approach here.
Yeah, I think I had higher expectations going into this one too, just because I was excited to get back into the world. But yeah, I'll go into the Heroes with. Just
Yeah, and well, just to be clear here, I give a lot of remarks, but it's not that I didn't like the book. It was a fine book, but when we go into a discussion, I always see the negative things most of all. That's what I want to discuss. Like, this didn't work for me and this didn't work, but in the end, I still enjoyed the book. And I still want to continue reading the Heroes. It's just that I don't know if, especially that big battle scene, if I'm going to like it. There was one question actually that I had with Casca. He dies, but you see he has a wound. He says, "Leave me behind," and then he comes back. Did you know that it was him when somebody talked to Friendly?
I did it at first. No.
I knew because the narrator used his voice, and that kind of it was a shame because the narrator is so good. When I hear that accent, I immediately knew it's Casca, and Casca is back. And I think I would have liked it more if I didn't know that.
Interesting.
That's the issue with audiobooks, isn't it? You heretics listening to audiobooks. It's not the thing.
Yeah,
well, he's just too good of a narrator. He should have just used like a monotone voice that you didn't know who it was. And I think that was a little bit of a mistake of his. Shouldn't have used that voice.
It's interesting. Yeah, I can't do audiobooks. I've tried. It's not for me. I wish I could. I lose. I just kind of drift off. I can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would be able to get through so much more material if I did audiobooks because I've almost got like over an hour commute every day in the car. Plus, when I go running, I could just. But no, because my mind just drifts. I stop paying attention. It becomes background noise. So it's not for me. It's just that's all it is.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. For me, it's also because I'm in my car a lot of the time. And sometimes I have to definitely go back or just press pause when there's something happening outside and I really need to pay attention. It's best just not to listen to the audiobook. But yeah, other than that, I do get to go through a lot more books that way. But sometimes things get spoiled because the narrator is too good. Now that we do touch upon Friendly, how did you like that character? I actually liked him, but I think that at times it's almost like it's not a real person. He has too many, and that's something that Joe Abercrombie sometimes does. He gives them too many traits that they almost feel like a caricature and not somebody with multiple layers. Like with Manza, the most important thing about her is she wants revenge. That's about it. She's like a tough lady. That's it. With Friendly, it's like with the numbers, and it's all the time the numbers. And in the beginning, I can laugh about it. Then after a while, I'm like, yeah, he's there with the numbers again. That's Friendly. but I do like that comic relief. Sometimes it was just on the edge that I didn't know, is this going too far for me, or if it's just okay.
Steve?
I was lukewarm on it. I just had its moments, but yeah, I wasn't too crazy about him.
Mm-hmm.
I thought my take on it was that it was an attempt to include some sort of autistic character in the story without outright saying so, and that fixation with numbers and so, or someone that's definitely in the spectrum and has got like a different perspective on the world. So rather than that's how I interpreted it. So rather than a personality trait, it was someone whose mind is just that little bit, few degrees to the side. And so I didn't mind it at all, and I thought, because he's a bit of a psychopath, isn't he? He was happy to be in prison. He was disappointed when he was, freed and stuff. So that was my take on the character, and I liked it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think that he tried to include some more diversity. I would have liked to see if then that character also had some characteristics other than, he's probably somewhere on the spectrum and that's it. But it did fit in how he also develops his other characters, I suppose. And I did like that Casca, who seems like somebody who laughs away everything, but he actually got along with Friendly. And he treated him with respect, while sometimes the other ones didn't. And how Friendly did pick up on that. And he really liked Casca.
I think that's Casca's thing of trying to find profit out of every person or situation, isn't it? And he's so friendly as maybe some sort of bodyguard that he could use, and he would use his charm to get Friendly on side. I think it's difficult how long is the book? 500 pages, 600 pages to flesh out so many characters properly in such a limited amount of time and move the plot forward, that you have to come up with shortcuts and ways to very quickly establish a personality or a voice for a character.
Yeah, I can see that. And while he does have quite a number of people in his books, and I think that sometimes just because he is a very good author, you start nitpicking. While with another author, I would have been glad if he has the main characters and those are fleshed out. And if we then have some secondary characters, it's fine. With Joe Abercrombie, he is a really good author. And I remember the characters of the original trilogy, which I really loved. I loved Giselle, I loved Glocta, I loved Bias, Logan, of course. So I had very high expectations. And then maybe it's almost unfair that you, like you said, in a 500-page book, that you expect all of the characters to be completely fleshed out.
That's a good point. I think it has to do with those expectations we go in with. Like I went into this one with high expectations, and you're right. It may be a little bit unfair to Abercrombie to just because the stakes have been, the bar is higher for him than most other authors for me, just because he's such a great writer.
Yeah. And I do think that he does something completely unique with grimdark, but also having that humor and those lighter moments. It's a very unique mix, and I haven't seen that too often. Now, I'm not going to say that I've read all grimdark. I think that Steve probably has read a lot more than me, but that mix between grimdark and humor, I do like it, and that is something that I haven't seen anybody else do before. And at the very least, I think that he's maybe one of the first. If other people have done it after him, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, in light of this conversation and now reflecting back on the book, I may have to even move it even higher up on my estimation, because if I'm to think about what book made me laugh out loud and squirm in disgust at the same time, and care for these characters and feel glee or sorry for I mean, thinking back on it, it's like, wow, so good, such a whole range of emotions that he can convey. That probably, for me, certainly one of the best books I've read in the last few years. Like I mentioned before, maybe because I'm in the middle of the mess that is the Wheel of Time, that this came like a breath of fresh air. But there's a lot of Wheel of Time fans out there, so I know.
Did you at least like because you have read the first Sanderson Wheel of Time now?
Yeah, that's right.
Is it better?
Yeah, definitely a lot better. You can tell there's a change in the writing style, and I think you can also tell the leftover scenes from Robert Jordan where there was just a copy paste. I think there's a particular scene which I would like to think Brandon Sanderson would have never written, and he probably cringed when it was just pasting it in the text. Yeah, I'm hopefully we're done with the spanking and there's no more spanking in the books.
I really hope so for you.
Yeah, you laugh, but could you imagine? So you've read 11 breaks of books, you have 9,000 pages into a story, and the smartest thing they figure out to torture one of these forsaken generals of the Dark Lord is to give her a spanking. Like, what war is this? What? It's just ridiculous. Anyway.
Yeah, I thought about reading that series, and then I saw Yolene's video, and she said, "Don't you won't like it." So I said,
No, you won't.
All right, Steve, I'm doing it, so you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah. I do applaud your perseverance, Jose, because I couldn't. But I still have because you have a review for the last book that you've read now. Huh? I think book 12.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I still need to watch that just to hear you suffer.
I think I made a mistake, and this is why I'm. Maybe Steve, you can tell me about Madison, but I think Wheel of Time. You go into BookTube. There's always a read along happening. Wheel of Time. I think Daniel Green is very guilty of hyping this up. So I think I bought the first 9 or 10 books in one go, and to be honest, I think there's only 2 books in my life I've never finished. So it was like, okay, I'm just gonna read through this, and so I can honestly say, I've read this. I think it's a pile of garbage. I'm just telling it like it is. But so all of a sudden, I'm curious about Stormlight Archive. I'm curious about Malazan, but I'm put off, and I don't know. But then I think nothing can be as bad as the Wheel of Time. Like in the 21st century, no one could have written that pile of stinking garbage.
Wow.
Now, I do think, especially if you're going to end up liking the last 3 with Brandon Sanderson, I'm only in the beginning of Way of Kings, but I am really liking it. And there's not a lot of spanking, so you should be fine.
Yeah, Guardians of the Moon is good. It's darker because I tried to read it last year and I just couldn't follow along with it, so I put it down. But I picked it back up this year, and it's darker than I remember it being, and but it's really dense. I sat there yesterday and read for I don't know how long, and I only read like 40 pages. It's really dense, and not in a bad way. It's good. It's a slow read. It's when I get to actively be reading to kind of follow along, and it's very confusing in the beginning. So
I keep hearing that. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I need to take a break and think about it.
Yeah, I can see that. So we are coming close to the hour mark. I don't know if any of you still want to have something discussed or if we rushed upon everything.
no, that's pretty much it.
So maybe closing remarks. If you do give star ratings, what would you give it? And did you like it more than the original trilogy or not?
So for me, I don't really give stars, but it's probably about in the middle. It wasn't. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It was fine. I did not like it more than the original trilogy, but I'm hopeful that the other standalones in the second trilogy are better. But we'll see.
Yeah, I never rate books. I say never, hardly ever. But yeah, maybe better than average. So maybe a 7 out of 10 or a 4 out of 5, something like that. Possibly enjoyed it better than the first trilogy, but purely because maybe I'm more familiar with the world now. I'm more comfortable with what Abercrombie is going to deliver. and therefore I was more in tune with the characters and the world and everything. So for me, it was a very enjoyable read.
Yeah. Okay. I think that I'm probably in between you two. I would say 3.5, maybe towards a 4. Especially after this conversation, I realized that I actually really do like the characters quite a bit and the plot. It's just the battles that I don't like. And I maybe need to just get over that sometimes and see it is fitting for the story. So just go along. But I did enjoy the original trilogy more. But that's because I really like traveling. And in the original trilogy, the second book is just one big travel instance. And even though it doesn't go anywhere, I really enjoyed that travel time and being with the characters. While here, we are in this city, now we're in that one. And we have traveled, but we're not seeing it. So that's why I think that I enjoyed the original trilogy more. But I am excited to get to the Age of Madness trilogy because I think
Yeah.
that I'm going to like that most of all. But who knows? Maybe the standalones will surprise me.
So what's the plan? Are you guys going to pick up the heroes anytime?
Mhm.
I am going to read it this month. I think Steve is also going to read it this month. And if we all finished it and we're up for it, we can do another discussion and see if we either like it a lot better or if the battles has done me this time.
Yeah, I think we plan on reading all of them up through the trilogy too, right, Yelene? That's kind of the plan
Yeah.
for now.
Of course, it's all like open. If somebody really doesn't like it and wants to stop, that's fine. But I do plan to read until the end of the Age of Madness trilogy, one per month. If we want to have a break after the standalones, we can do that and see whenever we want to start the trilogy.
Well, I'm on board with you, so let's do it.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, so everybody, thanks for watching. I hope this was an interesting discussion. I liked to see everybody's point of view, and see you next time. Bye.